you have an interest in horses and love learning more about horses, the horse industry, teaching, or even managing your own horse business, then you're in the right place. We would love you to join us on our mission, which is to improve the lives of horses around the world through the education of riders, handlers, and trainers. So get comfortable, listen in, and enjoy.
This is another of our popular Listener's Choice interviews, which we're playing over the weekend. We've chosen the most popular interviews for you to select the Listener's Choice winner. If you're not sure how the Listener's Choice competition works, have a look at horsechats.com/choice for the rules and the leaderboard. If you have the same vision as International Horse College, which is to have a world where people safely appreciate, respect and enjoy their horses, and the horses appreciate, respect and enjoy their people, then have a look at their website, internationalhorsecollege.com, registered training organisation 31352. And today we're going to talk to William Faber. I'm going to get Will to pronounce that because he does it so well with the accent, who's going to talk to us today. Now, I'm sure that Will's not coming as a stranger to quite a lot of people. He's done a lot of training. He studied extensively in Portugal with Nuno Oliveira. He's competed in eventing, jumping and dressage. He's a musician. He does lots of other things that we'll talk about through our chat today. But let's get started. How are you today, Will?
I'm wonderful and lovely to be here with you.
Oh, great to talk to you too, Will. And I'm sure you've got lots and lots of brilliant information for our listeners.
We'll try.
Yeah, I'm sure. Before we even get started, what about a favourite quote, just so they can get to know you?
Well, one of my favorites is by Bill Steinkraus, the great American jumper rider, who said, if you can't get the horse to like it, it's never going to be very good, talking about the training. And I think that's one of my favorite ones because it really comes down to that. I mean, the horse has to actually like it. And I'm amazed how many people in the world today, it seems like the whole riding world has moved in this direction towards this adversarial approach to the animal. It's us against the animal, and we must make it do this thing, that we want it to do. And we can only do that by, enforcing, this behavior that if you do not do what I do, I will, do whatever I will do to you, beat you or whatever the case may be until you do. And sadly, that has become so pervasive in what we see. And it's such a misery. I go and I watch people today riding horses at horse shows or here or there, even, riding down the trail. And they're out of balance. The horse is out of balance. They're hanging on the horse's mouth. People are being taught to actually pull against the horse's mouth while they're riding. Instructors are telling people to hold 10 pounds against the horse's, in your hands when you're riding. And, that should be a no-brainer to anybody to understand that if you are pulling with 10 pounds in your hands, that the horse couldn't possibly be comfortable having, a combined 20 pounds of pressure against its gums while you're trying to ask it to do something, right?
Yes.
So it's just amazing to me how far we've come, and that there seems to be this disconnect between people that, when they're not on the poor animal's backs, they're doing everything they possibly can do to, to show you how much they love these creatures and show the horses. But yet they've been trained by people who've told them that, well, when you're in the saddle, this is what you do. They have to be made to do what you're going to do. And as a person who's ridden horses, in pretty much every kind of horse sport there is from the time I was a child, I just learned that, when you're out there, because I was always the kid that got put on the horses that were stoppers and this kind of stuff,
Yep.
And how I in my early career, because I was the kid you could put on. I have really long legs, and I could wrap them around the horse, and I've been doing it since I was a child. And I could make them go, but I would come away sick to my stomach because my father, who was a great rider, didn't teach me that. I mean, what I teach now is what I learned from my father, and I had to go back and, when I began to ride professionally and ride with professionals, and once again, from the very beginning, I'm talking about going back to the 70s, it was already this, adversarial approach to the horse, that it's, we're making it do something rather than, the classical ideal of which I came to learn in many years to figure out what that actually meant, that we could get the horse to accompany us and be a companion in this work that we do. Just like a dog goes out with you. Not that it's different than what a dog does, but when you really ride a horse that really tries and is trying for you, it's such a totally different experience than one that wants to kill you.
Yes.
That you're barely making the ride go, or you're thankful that you get by at the end of the day. Like, you, boy, I'm through that ride. What about the next one? Well, and as I said, I've been in this business long enough to know that if you ride that way long enough, I'm pretty old at this point, and I don't have many of my contemporaries left because, quite frankly, many of them either got destroyed, by bad riding or accidents or whatever the case may be. Because if you keep riding in a bad, it's like the person who puts the bullet to their head, the gun, and pulls the trigger, with one shot in it, Russian roulette or whatever you call it. That's what you're doing. Like, when you ride out, I quit fox hunting because I got tired of waiting for the ambulances to pick the people up, because we started getting all these people in the hunt field who had been trained as what we call in America, show ring hunters. And they thought because they could go around, on a flat jumper, around a bunch of 3-foot fences, that they could ride cross country, and ride the hounds. And, they would come out on these horses. And I can't tell you how many once again, I stopped doing it because I got tired of waiting for the ambulances.
I'm just thinking, because you said your father taught a lot of the principles you use now. I was thinking it came from Nuno Oliveira. But tell us about how you got started with the trip over there. What made you go over there, and how long were you there for? Just tell us a little bit about that trip.
Well, the whole thing that drew it was that basically, as I said, the way I ride now was what my father taught me, and all about stretching horses, and that's how we rode. When I was a kid, we had a sale barn. My father had been a trainer on the East Coast, top jumper trainer. He was the trainer for Joe Louis, the boxer, of all people, back in the day. And he went into World War II at 45 years old. And this is one of the biggest things that most people today do not understand, that at the end of World War II, there were almost no horses left in the world. That Europe and Americas, we all of the horses. Halfway through World War II, they closed down Fort Riley Cavalry Depot and butchered 10,000 horses and sent all the meat to the troops, as did, all over Europe. And that's, the story about Patton saved the white horses from being slaughtered for meat, because the world was starving. So, of course, here were all these animals that basically there was no more use for. The automobile made the horse obsolete. So, to a starving population of the world, they were just food on the hoof, if you will. And most people don't realize that we lost all the really great riders, with few exceptions. It was only these few people, the wealthiest people, that were able to keep some stock and that sort of thing, and were the beginnings of when the horse business began to come back. Like on the East Coast of the United States, it all started with those very wealthy people that fox hunted and this sort of things, who started the whole hunter jumper show ring thing, as you will, because that was just something that hunt clubs started doing as a summertime thing, is what led to what we have now. But anyway, that's, people don't realize that we lost all of that knowledge, and we lost all those great horsemen. And many of the places that we came to think about that had great reputations in the past, turned out to be, well, let me back up. But this was what led me to travel around the world. As I said, I rode for a lot of professional trainers. When I went to college and I was the captain of the show jumping team, and people started asking me to show horses for them, and I started riding for a professional trainer. And but as I said, I left every day sick to my stomach. This guy, or woman actually it was, yelling at me to, rip that horse, the kind of stuff that you hear in those show ring and those hunter people, that have this abusive attitude. And I actually got off the horse one day and just handed the woman the reins and said, "You ride it," and walked out and never came back. And because I just couldn't stand it, because all it seemed like was, these animals that I'd grown to love my whole life, had been my best friends growing up, and my horses were my friends. I spent all my time on horseback, through my childhood. And, so it was like I had never experienced people just whipping and beating horses. This was something that, my father used to take me around as a child, and we grew up, we moved to Kentucky from New Jersey when I was 4 or 5. That's where I got my first horse, when I was 5. And my father would take me around to these saddlebred barns and Tennessee walking horse barns and show me the horrible things they did to these horses. He would actually take me and show, look what they're doing to this animal, because he was completely aghast at it. So that's sort of what, began my interest at a very young age of looking at what was really going on with horses, and looking behind the curtain, so to speak. So anyway, trying to get back to what I had begun with, which was what I do now, which was, a sane, humane approach to working with animals. And I went on the quest to find out what that was. And I read every book that you could read on the subject. There were no, like today, there's no videotapes, there's no YouTube. There was, you heard about the Spanish riding school, and I saw the old books of the Spanish riding school and read them, of course. And so I set out to go to Europe and find out what the truth was, if you will. And I had learned about Nuno Oliveira from some of his other students. I went through an instructor school for a year after college that was run by the woman who used to run Morven Park, if you remember Morven Park on the East Coast.
Yes, I do, actually, yeah.
So that was, what was her name? Something Rose, Mary Rose. And she was an MFA from England. And anyway, it was an interesting time to go through it. And it was an introduction to kind of her idea of what dressage was. Once again, I came to realize I needed to look further. But they were all people who were going over to Nuno's. And I was beginning, once again, I was reading all the books that there were to read on the subject, and reading all the old, the Steinbrecht and this and that, and all the French ones, and comparing the schools and reading all about that and trying. But it was always difficult, because in those days, because there were no videotapes, we had nothing that we could see of this work, We saw horses at the circus, and we saw horses, well, once again, what there was here, and there wasn't much of it. And it actually got off to the start in America in a bad way, and with people that were not so good, if you will, that, realized, but they came here because there was a market that they could niche themselves into. And they, quite frankly, many of them weren't very good. And I went through all the ones that there were here in America, and I actually went to a clinic with Nuno at the Potomac Horse Center before I went to Portugal. So I went to that clinic first, and I rode a horse, and I certainly thought it was the most interesting thing. At least it was a humane, kind approach to the animals, and the connection and this sort of thing. And I, before I ever studied with him, I actually read his book, Reflections on Equestrian Art, which should be in everyone's library. And if any of you can find some of his oldest books that were never actually printed in English, when he was actually really teaching and had the big school, outside of Lisbon and stuff. And in all the pictures, he has all of the students stretching their horses, in that very way. That a lot of people don't realize that, Nuno and Egon van Nijndorf were the two top riders in the world after World War II. And they both quit competition back then, in probably 1950. I don't remember the exact date, but they both walked away at about the same time, saying that they did not like the direction the sport was going. And that was all the way back then. And they were considered the two greatest riders in the world, and still to this day are, by those who have enough education to realize who they were, and what they had done. And their original, what I've come to know now, because I went there and I've studied, and read the books, whichever should be in everyone's also library. I mean, the two books that I really suggest is the book. It's written by a man named Eric Herbermann, who was a student of Egon van Nijndorf, and he very faithfully wrote down van Nijndorf's system, which is pretty much, what I would say, what I follow. If I read something, I said, I was doing this before I read the book. When I read it, and went, well, here we're on the same, my influence comes from back at the French classical writers, Fritz was the French who invented the Chambon, for instance, and the idea that horses need to develop and needed to have their necks out in front of them and not pulled into their bodies, if you will. And they needed to develop in that system, rather than, what's wrong with our system today is people just take the horse and crunch it into a frame, and start driving it like they're driving a car, if you will. And unfortunately, there's no suspension on the animal, so of course all the joints fall apart, and that's why we see such a, short-lived careers of all these horses today, if you will. But anyway, I digress a little bit. But that's what led me to Nuno, and I went there the first time. And from there, I went on. I studied at Mafra in Portugal. I studied at the Cadre Noir in France. I went to the Spanish riding school and spent 2 weeks. And I came away from all of those places still pretty confused because no one was doing, I wasn't seeing the ideal that I had in my mind until, because what a lot of people don't realize about Nuno Oliveira, he was a very interesting person to go study with because most people don't realize that he retired and he only went back into training horses because he was completely broke. So by the time he came back into the business, and he had a big supporter in Phyllis Field, and she basically is the one who brought him back and gave him horses to train and got him back going again. And, what I try to tell people is it was kind of like studying with Picasso in his last days,
Yep.
It was well worth it, but it wasn't what the experience would have been 20 years earlier when he really was interested and he really was still teaching and, if that makes any sense, like he was in, but you could see him perk up. So it was worth I can tell you 3 or 4 things, like an instance that made all the difference in the world to my riding. For instance, I was a guy who got 9s and 10s on his position in dressage, and regularly, and, thought I had, the elegant seat, whatever, and
Sure.
So I'm riding along, and he would sit up in his little tower there, not tower, but the little gallery, and he puts his hand on, he stops me and leans over the little window and whispers down to me, he says, "Stop trying to look so elegant and just ride the horse." I mean, just like that. And it just came over me, that it was right. I was so trying to have a perfect position that I was stiffening my body in the process. And I realized that that's the hard, anybody can make themselves stand like a soldier. It's being able to stand like a soldier for 10 hours to where you can relax into your own joints, if you will, and your muscles can hold themselves together that long, and it's kind of that same kind of thing. So it totally just that sentence alone was worth all the time I spent going there and all the above. I mean, those few little moments that certain things clicked. Another moment, if you've ever read his book, Reflections on Equestrian Art, there's a picture on the front of it of him doing Lavad with a horse named Jabut. And doing Lavad on that horse is what crystallized in my mind for me. And the horse was like 30 years old. So all these horses, by the time people my age, which is also why you have a wide variance in the people that say that they're, what I tell people is that I studied Nuno Oliveira. I studied what he did and how he approached what he did. And I studied his entire life and what he did from the beginning of it to the end of it. The lessons were just in terms of what you got these few moments, and it was worth it. Like on this Jabut horse, which now is probably 30 years old. But when all you had to do was just stiffen your back and the horse would just lift itself up into the most perfect Lavad imaginable, exactly as he did it, and with absolutely slack reins, lowering his hindquarters, hocks nearly to the ground, and you could feel him just curl his withers up underneath you. Because in order to do that, that's what they have to do. The back has to literally be pushed up underneath you. And you could sit like that for what felt like forever. And then when you just relaxed your back, the horse would just come down and walk.
Yep.
And that moment for me crystallized what collection was and what it wasn't. It's not shortening a horse's stride, if you will, which is what people seem to think it is.
If you're an equestrian coach or a horse riding instructor, or even if you aspire to be one, have a look at the free video series for horse riding instructors on the Horse Chats website. Go there now, have a look, horsechats.com. Yeah. Oh, well, I was going to ask you, the difference, because you'd studied with a few different schools, what the main differences were. I think you've sort of just explained it, but anything else you'd like to add in talking about differences?
In the difference in the different schools was really the different. I think Rainer Klemke said it well when he said that at the end of the day, there was kind of this school and that school, but at the end of the day, the really great riders all end up at about the same place, which is they have the idea that their legs need to be relaxed. You can't hold against the mouth of the horse, and if you look at many of the different, teachers who sort of were the fathers of dressage, like Boucher, and, Boucher, all the junk that Boucher did in the beginning of his career, he's the one who invented the roll crane idea, but at the end of his life, he totally rejected it as an idea. And in his writings, that's when he returned to his last system was called. He called it his system in bedroom slippers.
Yes.
And that's really, what Mr. Oliveira was all about. Your legs have to be draped down the side of the horse in relaxation, but yet you have to keep a core engagement, And the thing that was confusing, there's a couple of little videos on YouTube for people who are really interested in the history of all this and why it's so confusing. There's a couple of videos on YouTube that are grainy, that are from Nuno Oliveira at his heyday when he was doing one of his exhibitions, and he does Lavad and some other things. And you see what he looked like, and he had a perfect position. His back was absolutely straight, none of this sway back, with his belly out in front of him with a cigarette. I mean, unfortunately, what people think of him now, they imitate Nuno when he couldn't ride anymore. And he knew he couldn't ride anymore. He used to tell people all the time, "Oh, God, please don't take my picture. I look terrible." And he knew it. And really, the riding, this is what was so confusing, because he and his son rode at the same time. They rode 2 horses each. And every morning you got up and we watched, and the two of them brought in 2 horses and rode and trained them together. And it was like watching 2 different things. His son was flying around the arena in what I would call working gaits, in real gaits.
Yep.
And Nuno was kind of like going around in this weird kind of slow motion thing where it was just, this weird kind of passage trot. But what I came to know is that he was in so much pain. He really couldn't ride anymore. And he was putting on a show for the people that came. But the show was not the show that you would have seen 20 years ago, because he couldn't do it,
Okay.
And it led to a lot of confusion about his teaching. It took me, and it was only, and here I'll tell you, this is where it all came together for me, is that he arranged for me to go to Paris and spend some time with Michel Henriquet. And I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he's the one who wrote the book, 25 Years of Correspondence with Nuno Oliveira. And he was a wealthy banker who lived in this beautiful chateau with this beautiful riding stable. And Nuno had come there 4 times a year for a month for 25 years. So he had horses. So Nuno arranged for me to go there. And when I saw those horses, then I went, okay, now I get it. Because in Portugal, Nuno had a bunch of young horses he wasn't getting anywhere with, quite frankly, because he was just too sore, I think, really to ride them. And he had all these old broken down horses that were the school horses that half of them, they still went around. They still did some interesting things, but their backs weren't up. They were, they were barely trotting around the arena in some cases, if you will. So when I saw what these horses were doing, then I put it together. Well, I could see how Nuno was trying to start these young horses that he was starting in those days. And as I said, he died shortly thereafter. I don't think he ever got anywhere, particularly with this sort of batch of young horses, because I went there for 5 years in a row, and he was sort of, he was traveling a lot, and, we kept coming. I would go there for a month every year, usually at Christmas time. And, because that was just, for me, that was California. That was the easiest time. That's the rainy season here. I could get away because my barn would usually be flooded half the time. So anyway, but, over those 5 years, I saw that things were not, he was looking worse. The horses weren't getting anywhere. The young horses were, that he was training, because he was gone most of the time. And, he didn't live very long. I mean, he died at 64. He died in Australia at a clinic, and I talked to him, I think, like the week before he died. He was going to come to Texas and give a clinic, but he died before he got there. But anyway, it was a sad thing. But anyway, understanding that perspective, but seeing those horses in France showed me, okay, well, now I get it. These horses are round. These horses are lowering their hindquarters. These horses are completely relaxed. So they're, everything that I had always wanted to see in the training of a horse, which I had read about for years and years and years, including the Spanish riding school was the biggest disappointment I've ever experienced in my life. I mean, going there and thinking having read the books about it. And then I came to find out the real history of it. which I won't go into here, but it's and let's just say that since World War II, it has not been what it once was, and it was disappointing to see, horses. I was there for private sessions, that the public doesn't get to see because I was there as a rider, and I had to walk away and just say, well, I can't watch any more of this. And anyway, so that's what led me to where we are, and seeing those horses in France of Mr. Henriquez. That's an interesting book to read. Once again, 25 years of correspondence with Nuno Oliveira. And he was a very famous French rider. He only died just only a few years ago. He lived to be nearly 100, I believe.
Okay. I'm just thinking, if you were looking at young riders today, someone who has got potential, got talent, what are you in particularly looking at? And at what age would you see it? And outside of the obvious ability to ride, but their character traits, their personality, what sort of things are you looking for?
Well, of course, once again, there's our biggest problem with this today is that, living in this, children think they get all society that we live in and deserve everything. It's very interesting to see how, when I was growing up, and people like, the Queen of England was an inspiration. You saw,
yes.
My father used to show me pictures of how, look, her kids are out there mucking their own stalls, just like I had to do,
Mm-hmm.
And, and we really had to groom the horses, and we do this. And I just think parents who send their children to these horrible riding schools where they have no idea half the time that these horses are being drugged half the time, and that they're not really learning anything. And, and the horses are handed to these kids, and they trot around, and they think they know how to ride. And the real sad thing is for the people who aren't, I grew up in a horse family. If my father saw a trainer doing some of the things, I saw a show not long ago, and I sat and watched 4 young people go to hospital from one class, one of which the trainer whipped the horse. The horse wouldn't go in the ring. The trainer ran down the in booth, whipped the horse and no one said a word, whipped the horse repeatedly into the arena. The horse kid went off, fell on the horse fell on top of the child at the very first fence, which I couldn't believe that the officials didn't say anything to this trainer whipping this horse. And this is at the big, national, Indio horse show, and this kid goes off to the hospital. So it's coming in a real sense of, I don't get the real impression that these kids really like horses or love animals. I mean, that's the biggest thing that I look for. Do these kids really have a feel for this animal, or is this animal just another, trinket of some kind or other to them, or a status symbol or whatever the case may be. And as I said, the Queen used to clean her own stalls, and so did her kids. They knew that, I was fortunate enough to fox hunt with a lot of those kind of old families when I was young, and I remember reading in one of the books talking about how, you might be going to be the King of England one day, but this horse is going to tell you the truth.
Yep.
This is the only creature in your life that's ever going to tell you the truth. Your dog's not going to tell you the truth. This horse will tell you the truth about yourself, And we used to think, like Winston Churchill, one of my other, great quotes that I love is that, there's nothing, better for the inside of the man than the outside of a horse. That thing of, but we used that, but that is only true if riding is approached with a respect for the animals and a respect for the sport and what it takes to do it. When you dumb everything down, when kids are handed horses and, when they don't win a blue ribbon, they throw the reins down and walk away, which I've seen at horse shows. I more than once, I'm sad to say, and parents follow after them like, oh, you poor darling, yes, we'll buy you another one,
Yep.
This does nothing. This doesn't riding should make you a better person. That's, I guess, at the core of my teaching is riding should make you a better person. In fact, I was just, and the things that we look at, I encourage my students, what I really look for is, is those people that have that spark and they have that intelligence, and you can tell that they're willing to do the work. Riding is not easy. It takes a great deal of concentration. Like people have told me, well, I'm a concert level pianist. Okay. It took me as long to do this that it did to do that. You know, it took me 20 years to be a decent rider, and it took me 20 years to be a decent piano player. You know,
Yep.
that's what it takes to get the level that you are really fluent at anything. You know, if you read any books in the past that tell you about what it takes to learn something in your life, to really be a master takes 20 years.
Yep.
And that's what it takes to even think you're at that level. And, you know, I've been doing it now. Let's see, this will be my 60th year on horseback. This is my 60th year, amazingly enough. And, I'm still learning things about it. I'm still perfecting my technique. You know, my techniques I've trained more horses now. You know, I've trained hundreds of horses, and I've watched, whatever I teach is based on the fact that I, have been fortunate enough to have been in a lab of horse training my entire life. My farm growing up was my father, when he got back into the business after World War II, which is now in the early 60s, we bought a farm in Kentucky and had a sale barn. So my father would buy, as many people did in those days, when the horses started being available, like the horses with the flying tail that you saw the movie about at Disney and stuff. Everyone was going out to the West and buying up. That's where the first place we had horses again, were these horses that were coming up out in the West. And my father, as many other jumper trainers did, were going out there and buying up all the big ones. So my father was doing that. He'd go out and buy 50 horses at a time and bring them back to our farm. And I could have any of them that I wanted, but I had to take care of them. So, I had one or two that I, claimed to be mine, and the rest were in pasture. And when people wanted to see them, we were brought up and they'd say, well, I want to see that one. And we would catch that one and get on it and ride it. And sometimes these horses have been out in fields for a year without anybody on them. So let's just say I got an very early, I learned how to keep my shoulders back at a young age.
If you're an equestrian coach or a horse riding instructor, or even if you aspire to be one, have a look at the free video series for horse riding instructors on the Horse Chats website. Go there now, have a look, horsechats.com. All right. Now, just thinking, because you've had, all the things that you've done. If you had to pick one proud moment, is it like one particular time, or is it, a series of improvements? I can tell you my favorite moment on horseback that I ever in my entire life, what I would say was the epitome of the greatest ride I ever had, was I was fortunate enough to spend a year in Unionville, Pennsylvania, which is where the Cheshire Foxhounds, and I don't know if you're familiar with them, they still are to this day the best fox hunt in the world. It was an entire county outside of Philadelphia that was bought up by these wealthy families, and with deeds that it would be kept up for fox hunting for 500 years. And I was just there about a month ago, and it's still absolutely beautiful. It's all now in a big trust. Yep. And that's where Bruce Davidson, the great 3-day event rider, comes from. So his family, he married into the family that owned the hunt there. So, and people like Michael Plum, all those old Olympic riders that you think of, this is the greatest fox hunting in the world. So I was fortunate enough to spend a year there as a trainer for a family and get to go out fox hunting, with these kind of people on a daily basis, with 125, 150 horses in the field. Gallop in Unionville, the entire county, like the size of Los Angeles County, if you will, is all for fox hunting. Every fence has to be 50 feet off of the road. Every fence has to be post and rail. There has to be a jumping panel every 100 yards in all the fences everywhere you go. So you literally, and you have estates like the Campbell Soup Estate that's 5,000 acres of mowed grass and post and rail fences, and you can literally just gallop as far as you can possibly imagine going. Wow. So I was out, my job was to take these young steeplechase horses off of the racetrack for the family and start fox hunting them. So I'm out there one day, we go on a hunt, and we get on a run, and there's about 125 horses in the whole thing. And I'm at the back, because, I'm a worker, so, I'm at the back of the thing. But the way it works is once you get going, the people who fall behind. So we had been on a run for about probably 45 minutes. We'd probably gone over 30 fences or something cross country in varied terrain. And Mrs. Hannum, who was the hunt master at the time, who was the field master at the time and the owner of the hunt, I can see her out ahead of me, and we're the only two people left. And we're galloping across a big green field, and at the edge of the field into the woods, there's a coop, and there's just a big black hole beyond that. And I see she's maybe, 100 feet in front of me, and I see her hit that coop, go over and just disappear.
And I commit to do it, and I take and it's an 8-foot drop on the other side of it onto a straight. It was like the man from Snowy River. The trail on the other side was straight down for probably 100 yards to the bottom of a washout with the river.
Yep.
And we both galloped down that hill, and we made it to the bottom, pulled up, and she looked over at me and said, "I say that was something, wasn't it?" And I said, "Yes, it was." And that was the epitome. It took everything I've ever learned about riding and horses to be able to do that, and to walk away from it. And, and we had a lovely chat back. We hacked back together and just had a lovely chat with her. She was a wonderful woman who was like 78 years old, still out there fox hunting, and jumping four-railer fences and this kind of stuff. So, those were the kind of people that I wanted to emulate. And what I saw was in my search for dressage was that people either understood that horses need to work over their backs or they did not. And unfortunately, dressage moved away from horses working over the back. And now horses they talk about it, but it's rarely happening. Mostly the horses are very hollow, pulled into very shallow frames. They're basically just, they're incredible moving horses, but pulled into very shortened frames that look distorted and lame to me. I mean, none of them have any rhythm. They're throwing their legs all over the place. As I grew up in Tennessee and that sort of thing, and seeing all that, it looks much more like Tennessee walking horses to me. What I'm seeing in the Grand Prix dressage ring today, than it looks like dressage. In fact, it doesn't look like dressage to me. It looks like, well, as I say, it looks like a Tennessee walking horse, trying to do a Spanish walk or something.
Yep.
So understanding that thing, and it was always at the core of training was that, dressage was to make a horse that could do anything. That it wasn't just about trotting around in a little ring, as all those old photographs that we used to see of, those early days of Louis, whoever, the 14th or whoever, trotting around on some little hollow swayback horse in a little arena that was 15 meters by 30 meters. Those horses were doing what they were calling dressage, but it was really the saddlebred training of its day, if you will. The horses were moving flat-footed. Even if they got them to piaffe and prance up and down, they did it in a flat-footed way, much as what we see today. A lot of people don't understand about dressage that it wasn't until the cross-country people and the great cross-country riders of England were the first people that really solidified the idea of horses over their backs. There was a famous rider, Count Aurel, I think the name was. I can't remember exactly how to pronounce that, Aurel. And it was them, it was only like the late 1900s when this idea of the 3-day event horse, that dressage should be about not just something that you can do trotting around a little tiny ring on a flat surface, but something that applies to a horse that's galloping cross country. Otherwise, what use is it? It has no value if it has not that. And sadly, we've moved dressage back away from that idea. And if you see like the last Olympic Games, I mean, it's really interesting because the dressage for 3-day event riders used to be terrible. Now the dressage riders of the 3-day eventing are way better riders. And if you watch Michael Jung ride, I mean, his dressage work is way better than anything I saw any of the Grand Prix riders do, in the so-called Grand Prix of today. Because they're flowing over the back, so it's moving and it has rhythm, it has real beauty, So getting back to what we look for in students is that ability to perceive beauty, even, if you will, Because what I try to tell my people all the time, is you should be reading books, you should be, studying art, you should be expanding your mind. That will make you a better rider, and by virtue, riding will make you a better whatever you are, because you will learn to control your emotions. Isn't that what gets in everybody's way? I mean, if you look at what, if people would just really learn how to ride, it would do them a great deal of good, if you will, It's kind of because you have to get yourself out of the way in order to do it. Because if you can't get yourself out of the way, if you will, you're never going to be able to make that kind of subtle connection and make the kind of decisions and react with the speed necessary to do the things that we think of as upper level riding, and whether that's riding cross country or racing or whatever it is, it's the same thing. I don't see any difference. When it's the same thing. The horse must, whether a horse gallops over its back or it gallops hollow, a horse goes around a ring hollow or it goes around the ring over its back. But at the end of the day, what the big difference is, hollow horses win races. Yeah, once in a while. hollow horses win jumping competitions. A lot of hollow horses win dressage competitions, but at the end of the day, the horses fall apart, So,
Mm.
when people ask me, what do I think is a great horseman? I think a great horseman is the one who can keep his horse going for the longest, I look at people like a Marcus Enning, from Germany, who just retired that last Grand Prix horse of his. He'd been showing the horse for 20 years at Grand Prix and retired it sound.
Yeah.
That to me is horseman. That's
Mhm.
horsemanship. Horsemanship is the being able to manage these creatures so that they're not just expendable toys.
Mm-hmm. 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 Thinking about where we're going, what do you think is the biggest challenge in dressage moving forward? Dressage as a sport, as a competitive sport.
Well, there's no reason dressage always was it. I mean, it doesn't have to be cheapened to be competitive. We just cheapened it to make more people able to do it. The problem is, I think a great deal of people, once again, if you have learned to ride by holding 20 pounds against your hands the whole time you ride, you need to learn to ride all over again. I mean, in the sense of, it's like this, and every time we've ever had a good coach that's tried to teach us that, and I go back to even like Jack Legoff, when he was our, 3-day event coach, we lost him. He was the greatest 3-day event coach. And the only time we've ever had a great team was when he was our coach. And, and he has some of the people wanted to use draw reins and wanted to go to these modern methods, and he wouldn't let them. And that's why he ended his tenure, because some of the powerful, people in the sport, who are paying the bills, wanted to do it another way, much to the demise of the sport.
Yep.
I mean, it's just like even for jumping, if you read Bert Denemeth, for instance, was the guy who introduced the idea of draw reins, to horses. And in his book, but he goes on in his book about how you can use draw reins like to stabilize the head and neck and position out, but they should never be put between the horse's legs. They should go from the side forward, kind of like people think of those Vienna reins or something, but they should never be put between the horse's legs. Well, where does everybody put them now?
Yep.
Between the horse's legs. So all the horses end up with their broken necks, with their chins pinned down to their chest,
Yep.
in a frame that actually doesn't allow them to jump, because they can't jump through their backs from that position. They can spring off of their shoulders harder, but, So am I answering your question?
Yeah, I think so. It's sort of like we got to end with a solution. It's all right saying, well, there's problems here, but
well, that's what I'm trying to do. So the solution is exactly, and maybe that's what you guys are trying to do. It sounds like you have an online thing going. So that's what I have tried to do. Is I've looked at the world. I started to write a book, and I'm very sort of computer literate, and thinking one day, watching how the YouTube thing has evolved.
Yep.
And I suddenly realized that I could reach many more people, because, of course, people don't read books anymore, much, unfortunately. In fact, all the good horse books are all going out of print.
Yep.
So anyway, I realized that I could reach more people doing the video thing, and we've grown into, a huge movement. Our thing is now number 7th in the world on
This is Art to Ride.
We have 40 associate trainers. That's Art to Ride, arttoride.com, and we have 40 associate trainers around the world. We have clinics. I've been in Russia. I've trained in practically every country in Europe at this point, Australia, and it grows between 100 and 150 new members every day. And I just set out, which I think should be everyone's goal. I set out to create a site where if you didn't know a thing about horses and wanted to learn how to do this right, that you could go there and you could learn everything that you would ever need to know and see people doing it correctly and watch other people go through the same process.
Yep.
And it's worked beautifully. And that's what people are doing. And there's a site, the Facebook sites where people can join, where if you have a question, my 40 associate trainers around the world answer those questions within minutes that you might put up a question on the site. So I've tried to create a reference point for anyone in the world who wants this information. And if you don't have a dime, it's now available to you.
And what about videos? If people are riding, they can take videos of their riding, send you that?
Yes. Now, we also have a critique service for a longer thing. Like if you want to send me a half-hour video, there's a critique service on there that you can pay for that service. But once again, if you just want a question, that is a pay service, but the other is completely free.
Okay.
And just watching every day, people are posting videos of their horses and asking questions, and then all the ones that they send me to critique also go online. So that's one of the things that I once in a while will tell somebody that once again, what they sent just was, so bad, if you will, that they need to go back and try again before we even think about putting something up. And they always go back and do it and come back and improve it. But that's only been a couple of times that I've done that. But, everyone, because I want everyone to learn from everyone else, and get their egos out of the way and, get also what they think they know out of the way. Because unfortunately, everyone now lives in this world where, and I'll tell you this, I just had someone come to my clinic who had just gone through the USDF judges program. And I've been saying this stuff for years. She went through the program, and at the end of and she said everything that they told her through the program was exactly what I was teaching in the clinic.
Mm-hmm.
And she said at the end of the program, they literally told the applicants that if they taught like that, if they judged like that, they'd never be hired. And this is what's happened in dressage.
Wow.
Klaus Hall was our coach very briefly, and his thing, if we want to improve the sport, no one has to know who the judges is. That judging has to be from a pool, so the judges will be unafraid. The way it is now today is the wealthy students are choosing the judges. If you give any wealthy client a bad score, or any upper level rider who's known a bad score, you will never judge again. It's as simple. That's how it is. And it's basically corrupt, and everybody knows that it's corrupt. And even the USDF knows that it's corrupt. So we have to change it. So one of the things that we're doing is we are starting the World Dressage Federation. So we are starting an entirely new dressage federation, based on sound principles of classical work, and the rules thereof will be that, and design much more. We'll start out with horse shows online. We will have physical horse shows. At physical horse shows, it will be, much more like eventing rules used to be, where trainers are not allowed, in the sense that, when you come, if you can't ride and warm up your own horse, you have no business being at a horse show. You can't have a trainer screaming things at you from the edge of the line. And that's how it always was in eventing, because, this is what the problem is. We get people coming to horse shows, and they get this idea from the time that they have to have somebody holding their hand every second. I mean, once again, if you can't ride your horse well enough to go to a horse show, then you shouldn't be at the horse show. You know what I mean? If you can't warm up your own horse with some reasonable level of safety and ability, what are you doing trying to ride in a horse show? But the horse show people realize, the people who put on horse shows, which is now just this big industrial deal, they realize that you could charge kids to go over poles on the ground. Kids are happy to pay $100 to go around and have somebody lead them over a pole on the ground. The trainers love it. They get paid for doing it. It's ridiculous. It's what's led to all this nonsense of, these people being so trainer, once again, it's, that's why if you ever rode in the hunt field, at the end of the day, what I loved about the hunt field is that, you have to ride. And if you can't ride, you're not going to make it. There's no one's going to make it for you. There's no one, yelling commands at you from the side. If you don't have the skills, you're going to get hurt. And unfortunately, I mean, once again, that's why I quit fox hunting, because there got to be too many people getting hurt because they weren't getting the level of education they needed to be able to come out and do what they were trying to do. Same thing with eventing. That's why we have so many people getting killed in eventing. We took out all the roads and tracks and the steeplechase, which used to eliminate all the riders who had no business being there. Take all that, and now they just get to go cross country. We're having 4 deaths a year at 3-day eventing. That's crazy. And that's why.
So many questions I can keep asking. So much we can keep talking about. I'd love to have you back again. I'd love to talk and just explore some of these areas that you've talked about. You've just got so much information you can talk to us, give to us. But if people would like to contact you, the best place is Art to Ride, and that's ART, the digit 2, the number 2, and then ride.com.
Exactly right. And once they get to there, that will lead them to the Facebook sites, which there are numerous ones. There's an open Facebook site, and there's another one called Fans and Followers that you have to ask to join, which is really where the real community is of people who are doing this on a daily basis. And,
good.
And it's a wonderful group, a really supportive group of people, and I suggest anybody who's who is looking for a nice bunch of horse people, that's the place to go. It's all kept very positive.
All right, perfect. All right, Will. Well, I think if people would like to talk to you too, those contact details will be on your page, which will be horsechats.com/William and now your name, it's Faber, Faeber, Faber.
Yeah, you can say Faber or Faber, either one.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe just go to Horse Chats and search for William and you'll find it. Or search for Will, you'll find it. Yeah.
Listen, it's been lovely chatting with you, and if you're ever in our area, stop in and see us.
Love to. Okay, good to talk to you, Will, and hopefully we'll talk to you again sometime soon.
Talk to you again. That was fun.
Okay, bye-bye. If you've enjoyed this chat, then please comment, rate and subscribe. If you'd like any changes or recommendations for guests, then please contact us through horsechats.com. And while you're online, have a look at the government-accredited courses at internationalhorsecollege.com. Registered Training Organisation 31352.
Remember that our comments and instructions are general in nature and do not take into consideration your individual horses or your individual ability and circumstances. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please leave your comment below.